Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, welcome. Welcome to Oxford students, welcome back to Oxford alumni, welcome students and friends from around the globe. I'm Peter Tufano, the Dean of Said Business School at the University of Oxford, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to this Oxford Said GOTO Summit and to this special edition of Leadership in Extraordinary Times. We have a great program ahead. We'll hear from our board chair, Paul Pullman, our distinguished guest, former U.S. Vice President and Nobel laureate Al Gore, from my colleagues, Aoife Haney and Peter Droback, from our remarkable students, and from Nigel Topping, the UK's high-level champion for UN climate talks, COP26. Before we begin, I'd like to set the scene and explain to those unfamiliar with Oxford what this special event is all about. Today's May 1st, or May Day, and that's been a special day in Oxford for over 5 centuries. Each year at dawn, the choristers of Magdalen College Choir climb the tallest structure in Oxford to the top of a 511-year-old Magdalen Bell Tower. Assembled below are thousands, young and old, last year 15,000 from Oxford. And when that choir starts to sing, a silence covers the crowd, and the sweet voices of that choir can be heard throughout the area. Then there's a prayer and more singing. The prayer, shared virtually this morning, is offered for people and planet. The bells peal to send people off on their days. In my Italian-American family, one of my aunts would remind me of our respective roles. Peter, she'd say, I pray, you work. Well, at Oxford, it's our work to turn prayers for people and planet to reality. Our colleagues in the Jenner lab are racing to test and then produce a vaccine to vanquish COVID-19. What started as a medical problem became a public health crisis, political issue, an economic crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a civil liberties question, an education crisis, and more. It is a systems problem. And the nature of systems problems requires that we work harder to solve them. They're intertwined, and solutions will require multiple points of view, multiple capabilities, much collaboration, willpower, tenacity, and work. At Oxford Said, we acknowledge that our business school not only needs to train leaders to run organizations, but also to train those business leaders to tackle these systems problems, the biggest issues the world faces. Since 2012, Global Opportunities and Threats Oxford, or GOTO, has been a required part of our curriculum. And in it, students gain tools to diagnose and intervene in systems, working in small groups to find intervention points, leveraging business contribute to the solution of the world's biggest issues. Over the years, we've immersed ourselves in issues around water, energy, demography, and more. This year, we've been focused on climate action, working with our outstanding colleagues at Oxford Smith School for Enterprise and the Environment and the Scholl Center for Social Entrepreneurship. This GOTO Summit is the culmination of that work. Nearly 500 MBA and executive MBA students and 80 teams have been working on mapping the systems that contribute to this climate emergency that we face and finding strategic intervention points. You will hear from the best of those teams soon. At the GOTO Summit, we invite to Oxford an inspirational systems leader, a woman or a man who has worked across boundaries to call attention to and find solutions to the world's biggest problems. Today, we're honored to welcome Vice President, Nobel laureate Al Gore to join and inspire us. No one has done more to raise our consciousness and urge collaborative solutions to address the threat of climate change. Normally, our GOTO Summit, as with most of our activities, would happen in lovely Oxford. But with these new routines, as we fight the spread of COVID-19, we've all found our lives becoming virtual. In response to this, we created a series, Leadership in Extraordinary Times, to hear from academics and world leaders about the issues of the day. In the spirit of sharing, we decided to bring this event, our GOTO Summit, to all of you, to our alumni and friends, to students and faculty from across Oxford, and to our colleagues in business schools around the world. As my aunt said, I pray, you work. We have much work to do. While the road to recovery from this pandemic is long, at the end of that road, we need to emerge into a better world, one that ensures that 500 years from now, the Oxford choristers will still be singing on a beautiful May morning on a planet that we've protected. It's my honor to introduce Paul Pullman, the chair of the Said Business School Board, the founder of Imagine, the chair of the International Chamber of Commerce, former CEO of Unilever, and so much more. Paul is a true systems leader, always urging us to forge a more just world. Over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Peter. And as chair of the site business school, it's an honor, obviously, to introduce Vice President Gore. And glad to see you, sir, healthy and safe. And with Al, I have to say we probably have the biggest and best champion that we can think about, and a pioneer in tackling climate change, and an honor for us to have you with us. But for once, instead of introducing Al, I was thinking about that, and then I thought I've heard many of the introductions for him, and frankly, they're all the same. I simply wanted to use this opportunity not to go via his bio or Wikipedia, but to thank you. To thank you actually for a lifetime, both in government and business, that has touched many people, including myself. And I thought that would be more important in the world that we are today. Climate is obviously the topic that we're talking now, and you are the real deal as far as I see it, with your passionate fight for this already since a long time. In fact, it was already when you started studying in Harvard in 1968, I believe it was, under Roger Revelle, that you already picked up the topic and probably got the passion for it. And why you probably are still one of these rare people in the US that actually believes in science. And I appreciate that. But you were also already very early in putting it in writing in one of your books. One of your first books, and New York Times bestseller at that time, was the Earth in Balance and Ecology and Human Spirit. And actually that would be as valid today. I think increasingly people are seeing with this terrible COVID crisis, the correlations between biodiversity, human health, and climate change. And let us not forget those lessons, hopefully, as we come out of it. I also want to thank you for going into public service. It's very courageous, actually, to do that when you're 28 years old and going into Congress, although I'm sure there was some blood in the family that encouraged you. But what I really appreciated was that your first meeting was actually on climate. You held your first congressional meeting on climate, and that took courage, especially if you put yourself in that time period. You've also been always a great champion to try to get out of this ridiculous race of arms control, obviously encouraging arms control and getting out of this ridiculous race in nuclear spending and defense spending. But you've also championed throughout as on climate whilst in the Senate. And again, I want to thank you for that, not to be succumb to the heavy pressures undoubtedly in Washington of the many lobbyists that run around there. As Vice President, you've also worked on NAFTA, and you understood global cooperation. More important now than ever, you actually lived it. You've always been a champion of trying to bring in the Chinas and the Russias under certain conditions, undoubtedly, but making them part of a global work order, because we've clearly seen that it can't function otherwise. And then your championing of the Kyoto Protocol. Already the first times that we met, the grasp of these details and the knowledge of the history that was there has served as well as we carve out our plans coming now that we're working on. And then next to an amazing contribution to civil service, for which I wanted to thank you, I also actually want to thank you for the contribution to business. It's a little bit closer to my heart. But first, you started business as a movie maker and actor, and the Inconvenience Truth definitely started a movement. I remember seeing it actually in Michigan, close to my house in Traverse City. And I wish I would have taken Michael Moore with me at that time, but you were way ahead of him, may I say. And then obviously you got the Nobel Prize for that, and the movie got the right recognition with the IPCC, may I say, a wonderful organization. So thanks for that. And then thanks for actually starting Generation with Al Gore. Your joke is always blood and gore, but Generation is more than that. When you started it 15 years ago and grew it into an incredible company right now, you already had the principle that you only would invest in companies that would be sustainable and long-term. And obviously, we were honored to be part of that as Unilever. But even now, looking at your investment portfolio, you clearly have the companies investing in these companies that provide the goods and services consistent with a low-carbon, prosperous, equitable, healthy, and safe society. I believe that should be the norm of any investment. And you again were well ahead of that trend, and I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank you for actually what you've done with the WEF. I remember our many meetings. You are in the advisory council in the WEF, which is called the Board of Trustees, and have been instrumental in ensuring that the 50-year celebrations of the WEF really took to heart the multi-stakeholder focus and actually climate. This was one of the best meetings as a result of that. And finally, I like to be a spokesperson and many times for the youth. And the way that you supported now again Earth Day, the climate strike that is going on, your own programs of training that you're providing with your climate reality, and sending so many people to a higher level of passion for tackling climate change and making them the strongest advocates. That's a generous gift. So I just wanted to thank you for who you are as a person, as a true leader, someone that has courage, puts the interest of others ahead of your own, knowing that by doing so, we're actually all better off. But first and foremost, as a great human being and as a friend. It's my pleasure to give the word to Al Gore. Al, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. What a generous introduction, and I'm extremely grateful for that over-the-top rhetoric. But I want to say, as we sometimes do in the U.S., back at you. You have been an unparalleled leader in the business community with your stewardship of Unilever, and also and demonstrating how you can make these principles consistent with excellent business leadership. But you have also always taken the time and expended the energy to provide leadership in our broader global society. And it's been a privilege and honor to work with you over the years. Dean Tufano, all of the other distinguished guests who are present, most of all to the students, and we will hear from some of them in a bit, to your families, and to the other schools that the Said Business School has generously invited to be a part of this event. It is certainly an honor for me to be able to participate. Thank you so much. That's not just a boilerplate expression. I recognize the legacy and position of Oxford and this business school, and it really and truly is an honor. I have also had the opportunity to review some of the projects that these students have been working on, and I'm going to be eagerly awaiting the competition that will be in the latter part of this ceremony and this event. And I want to say to all those who participated in advance, congratulations. Those who win the competition, extra congratulations, but to everyone who has been a part of this. It's been an extraordinary effort. So the climate crisis, which you have chosen as the theme this year, is the preeminent challenge of our time. We are reminded of how much change can come very quickly in our world by the present COVID-19 crisis. Someone wrote recently that we see people all around the world today walking around and navigating according to the coordinates of a world that no longer exists. It is a challenge for all of us to try to piece together the deeper meaning of the changes that are now underway, and to anticipate the fantastic opportunities that will confront us when we eventually emerge victorious in the challenge presented by COVID-19. It is worth noting that there are linkages between the COVID-19 crisis and the larger climate crisis, which I will address in a moment. Here in the United States, a study at Harvard University has already shown that the preconditions that raise the mortality rate from COVID-19, including hypertension and other cardio-related preconditions, pulmonary preconditions, and diabetes and others, almost all of these preconditions are leveraged to a more harmful level by the air pollution that comes from the burning of fossil fuels. We still rely on the burning of fossil fuels for almost 80% of the energy in our world. And now with 7.8 billion people and the incredible growth rate powered by fossil fuels, we are pressing against the limits of the climate system and the ecological system of the Earth. But along with the carbon dioxide and methane and other heat trapping gases that cause the climate crisis, we also spew into the sky the particulate pollution, including what's referred to as soot. And according to some studies, almost 9 million people die every year in our world because of conditions brought on by the inhaling of that air pollution. And that pollution also makes these preconditions for higher death rates from COVID-19 much worse than they would otherwise be. We are seeing in the United States a direct correlation between the higher levels of fossil fuel air pollution and a higher death rate from COVID-19. You have seen that in the UK as well. We see it elsewhere in the world. There were similar linkages made during the SARS epidemic at the beginning of this millennium. And a recent study 18 months ago went back and did a fine-grained analysis of the 1918-1919 flu pandemic and correlated the deaths city by city in the United States with a very detailed analysis of coal burning in those same cities. And what they found was a 19 to 26% increase in the death rate from the 1918-19 flu, with even a moderate increase in coal burning. Let me also say that the issue of environmental injustice is also revealed in stark relief by this COVID-19 tragedy. We know that all around the world, and I will use examples mainly from the United States, that minority groups, communities of color, low-income communities, in the US also Hispanic and Native communities, all of whom have been deprived by a legacy of racism and discrimination from the means to defend themselves against the siting of coal-burning plants and hazardous waste sites. They are far more likely to live downwind from the smokestacks and downstream from the hazardous waste flows and adjacent to the coal ash sites and the hazardous chemical waste sites. As a result, there are other factors which I'll get to in a moment, but we are seeing a death rate much higher, especially among African American communities. Today in the state of Georgia, where African Americans are less than a third of the population, 80% of those who are hospitalized in the state of Georgia are African Americans. Majority African American counties in the US are 3 times more likely to have infections from COVID-19 than those in majority white counties. And the death rate from COVID-19 and majority African American counties is 6 times higher than the death rate from COVID-19 in majority white counties. In state after state that collects data with race as one of the metrics they measure, we see the death rate being more than twice as high as the percentage of the population. We see these same kinds of results in the UK. An analysis by The Guardian revealed that 3 London boroughs with high Black, Asian, and other minority populations, Harrow, Brent, and Barnet, were also among the 5 local authorities with the highest death rates. So this crisis reveals some of the weaknesses and inequities in our civilization that must be addressed as we come out of this crisis. Now, of course, as I said, unequal access to healthcare, the kinds of jobs that can't be zoomed into, poor housing conditions, the impact of racism itself, which is linked to hypertension and a number of other health disorders, and unequal incomes. These also contribute to the higher infection and death rates. But this is all linked. And this gives us an opportunity, even as this is an all hands on deck moment to conquer this virus, it nevertheless presents us with an opportunity to take a broader look at the much larger challenge of the climate crisis. Now, the linkage goes on. First of all, the most obvious linkage is we see with the pandemic the extreme danger of ignoring clear, loud warnings from the scientists and the doctors until it's almost too late. And many deaths and illnesses could have been avoided if those warnings were heeded more quickly. That's the same situation we face with the climate crisis. Scientists have been warning of this looming disaster since Roger Revelle 50 years ago, my mentor. And the IPCC has been ever more strident in trying to get the attention of policymakers about this disaster. We are now today the emissions are temporarily down, perhaps by as much as 6% this year, but we know from the Great Recession that without policy changes, they'll go right back up again, and we need to make those changes. But on average, we are spewing into the thin shell of atmosphere that surrounds our planet 152 million tons of man-made heat-trapping global warming pollution every single day. We're using the sky as an open sewer. And we can connect the dots because these heat-trapping gases linger in the atmosphere a long time. For CO2, on average, the scientists tell us the molecules linger for about 100 years. The math is more complicated and above my pay grade, but they say it's okay to use that as an average figure. And for all of the time that they stay there, they trap as much extra heat every single day as would be released by 500,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding in the atmosphere every 24 hours. This, of course, is destabilizing climate, disrupting the water cycle, causing the so-called rain bombs that have been inundating the United Kingdom in recent years, including in the first quarter of this year, the wettest on record in my country and elsewhere. Last year, 20 million acres of prime farmland in the American Midwest couldn't be planted because of the flooding and the continuing downpours, because 93% of that heat energy is going into the oceans. And with apologies to Las Vegas, what happens in the oceans doesn't stay in the oceans. It comes back over the land where most people live in the form of atmospheric rivers that on average are 25 times larger than the Mississippi River, the largest in North America. And when they encounter conditions that release downpours, we get these fantastic deluges that would have occurred in the past once every 1,000 years, once every 5,000 years. Now, every night on the television news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelations. And we also see it manifested in the deeper and more intense droughts that are interfering with agricultural production as well, with much higher temperatures that are now on the verge of making significant areas of our world in the Middle East and North Africa and the Persian Gulf region and parts of India and China literally unlivable, with the combination of temperature and humidity that make people leave. And we see the geopolitical consequences already occurring. It's well known that the climate crisis was the principal cause of the Syrian drought from 2006 to 2010, which destroyed 60% of the farms in Syria, killed 80% of the goats and other livestock, and drove all of these refugees into the cities of Syria, and then unleashed 1 million refugees from the Eastern Mediterranean into Europe. And actually, the biggest burden was to adjacent countries. But of course, with the Western media, we see most of all the geopolitically destabilizing consequences in Europe, which have contributed to the rise of this populist authoritarian movement, reawakening the lurking desire for strongman government, which is an enemy of representative democracy. We see also the melting of the ice in Greenland and Antarctica, which is already contributing to a significant increase in the estimates of sea level rise. We have cities in the US on our coasts that already are experiencing what they call sunny day flooding, when the high tides come in and take over the streets, and cities like Miami and Galveston and Norfolk. And of course, that is nothing compared to the impact on areas like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and countries in West Africa, and low-lying island nations. So the consequences of this crisis are challenging our civilization. But the good news is we are also seeing the emergence of incredibly exciting solutions. And some of the projects that you will hear about shortly are examples of the wonderful opportunities that we have before us. I will speak for many, I think, when I say the first time I became aware of the startling exponential cost reduction curves in technology came when the computer chips were first developed. And what we now know as Moore's Law became a fact of life. And then we saw second and third order reductions in cost in things like flat screen TVs and mobile telephones, and the list goes on. Well, the exciting news is that this same phenomena is now also evident with solar panels and windmills and electric vehicles and batteries and regenerative agriculture and thousands of new efficiency technologies that are eliminating reservoirs of unnecessary waste in all parts of our lives and in business and industry in particular. It has now reached a stage that it is challenging the dominance of fossil fuels. 5 years ago, electricity from wind and solar was cheaper than electricity from fossil fuels in only 1% of the world. Today, 5 years later, it's cheaper in 2/3 of the world. And 5 years from now, the projections are it will be cheaper in just about 100% of the world. Figures were just released 2 weeks ago showing that in calendar year 2019, if you examine all of the new electricity generation installed worldwide, 72% of it was renewables, virtually all of that solar and wind. Now we are seeing fully depreciated coal plants and gas plants being shut down by utilities and replaced by brand new solar and wind farms. This trend is going to continue. We are in the early stages of a sustainability revolution based on new digital technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence that are giving executive teams and businesses around the world the ability to manipulate electrons and atoms and molecules and also genes with the same efficiency that the IT companies have already demonstrated in their manipulation of bits of information. This sustainability revolution will have the magnitude of the industrial revolution, yet the speed of the digital revolution. We are already seeing this transformation take place. And by the way, young people are leading this charge, and I'll return to that at the close of my remarks. But I want to mention two differences between the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis. Similar, as I said, in our great need to heed the warnings of the scientists, but different in two important respects. The consequences of this pandemic may last 6, 8, 12 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, we don't know. But that's the general range. We're already seeing the emergence of some promising therapeutics, and hopefully the scientists and doctors will come up with an effective vaccine. But the consequences of the climate crisis will last for centuries. And it's literally unbearable to me and so many hundreds of millions of others to imagine the generation represented by these students and other generations to follow, who at some point in their lives, if we do not succeed in facing this climate crisis, would have the opportunity to look back at us in this year 2020 and ask, how in God's name could you have not reacted? How could you have ignored the warnings of the scientists? How could you have ignored Mother Nature, who is now screaming at you with these extreme climate-related events that are almost impossible to misinterpret? So that is a clear difference. Here's a final difference. I'm sure there are more, but whereas large parts of the global economy have been shut down in order to conquer this virus and are now haltingly reopening, we don't have to shut down economic activity in order to solve the climate crisis. We should shut down the fossil fuel burning plants as soon as possible. But this is the greatest opportunity to create new jobs in the history of the world. Already here in the United States, for the last 5 years, the fastest growing job has been solar installer. The second fastest growing job is wind turbine technician. Solar jobs are growing 5 times faster than the average job growth. We have the opportunity to retrofit buildings. If we can simply solve the so-called agent principal divide, which gives incentives to property developers and builders to create buildings at the lowest possible first purchase price, and look instead at the incentives that are facing the owners and leasers of those buildings who want lower monthly utility bills, and telescope those savings so that we can align those incentives, we can create tens of millions, hundreds of millions of jobs, retrofitting residential, commercial, and industrial structures with more caulking, more insulation, better windows, LEDs, jobs that cannot be outsourced. So we have an opportunity to create the largest surge of sustainable economic growth in all of history. If we stop navigating according to the coordinates of a world that no longer exists, as I mentioned earlier, and instead start navigating according to the coordinates of the world that is now coming into view. A famous ice hockey player, Wayne Gretzky, famously said once that he skates not to where the puck is, but to where the puck is going to be. As this pandemic is eventually conquered, we need to take advantage of these unparalleled opportunities. Now, in closing, I want to come back to the special role played by young people. Paul, you know, and other business leaders know already that in trying to hire the best and brightest young women and men coming out of graduate schools and universities and technical schools, as they are interviewing these young people are interviewing them. They want to know whether or not the values of the business they're thinking of joining are aligned with their own values. They want to be able to tell their friends and their families and their peers that, yes, they are excited to make a good wage or salary, but they also want to be a part of something more important than that. They want to be a part of making the world a better place. And that is the spirit of our age that this new generation is bringing, not least these graduates who have been working so diligently and with such creativity on solutions to the climate crisis. I remember as a boy of 13 listening to an American president of that era, John F. Kennedy, when he famously issued his challenge to put a person on the moon and bring him back safely within 10 years. I also remember that more than a few adults in that era thought that was a reckless and unwise pledge, wasting money that could be more usefully spent on other priorities. But 8 years and 2 months later, Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. And in the moment he did so, there was a great cheer that went up in mission control at NASA's facility in Houston, Texas. Less known is the fact that if you look at the systems engineers in that room, in that moment cheering, their average age was 26, which means their average age when they heard that challenge was 18. And they changed their lives and changed their courses of study, changed their personal priorities, and worked hard to develop the skills and gain the knowledge that would enable them to be a part of successfully meeting that inspiring challenge. That is what these students that you have before you in this ceremony today have done as well. That is what Greta Thunberg and all of the other young people who are marching and part of the climate strike are doing. And it's happening all over the world. These changes are not going away. They are getting ever more serious. People are awakening to them. The solutions are ever more available. And the role of business is ever more important. Paul mentioned the World Economic Forum in his generous introduction. Klaus Schwab, 50 years ago, put out the philosophy of multi-stakeholder analysis. In the United States, our most distinguished business organization, the Business Roundtable, last year, 50 years later, adopted those same principles. Business is awakening to this challenge. We can no longer tolerate a continued focus on short-term incentives, on short-term compensation systems, on shareholder primacy. We have to look at the impact of business on society as a whole, on their employees and their families and the communities where they do business and their supply chains and the distant employees and communities that are affected. And the good news is that the investor community is already finding that that kind of holistic analysis gives a much more accurate picture of which firms are likely to profit and prosper and thrive during this unusual new era of challenge. I am optimistic, not least because of what you're going to hear from these young people in a moment. But I would simply close by saying to them and to everyone who may be listening, that if you are tempted to be discouraged, do not be. If you have not yet joined in the efforts to mobilize solutions to the climate crisis, what are you waiting for? This is the challenge of our time. It is the most serious challenge that human civilization has ever confronted. We have the ability to rise above our limitations. We have done it in meeting crises in the past, and we have the ability to do it now. But if you think for one moment that we as human beings do not have the ability to rise above our limitations and do not have the will to change, always remember that the will to change is itself a renewable resource. Congratulations, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this inspiring ceremony.
Mr. Gore, thank you for that call to action. That's just incredible. I'd like to transition now and hear from some of these amazing young people, 4 of our MBA students who have some questions for you. The first one comes from Daniel Halod. Daniel?
Hi, Mr. Gore. Thank you very much. As Pierre said, my name is Daniel Halod. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and an MBA student at Oxford Saïd Business School after completing my master's in environmental management here. Mr. Gore, we need to change behaviors significantly to act on climate change in a timely manner. However, as you said, and shown through the COVID-19 and subsequent restrictions, there have been significant pushbacks on required behavioral changes. How do you think we need to best communicate the strong behavioral changes and sacrifices required to transition to a carbon neutral world? And what can we learn about this from the COVID-19 crisis? Thank you.
Well, thank you, and congratulations to you. And thank you for a great question. I want to introduce the phrase that many of you already are familiar with. We need a just transition. We need to feel gratitude to the coal miners and to all of those who have been a part of producing the sources of energy that have led to the creation of this economy that we have inherited. Yes, there are problems, and now that we see them clearly, we have to address them. But they're not the fault of the workers. They're not the fault of those who have devoted their lives to careers in these industries. And we owe them justice in the transition, which means finding good, better jobs for them. As I mentioned before, the good news is that these jobs are being created at an unprecedented rate. But it's not always easy for someone who has devoted her or his life to one profession to quickly jump over to a new occupation. So job training is an obvious part of the solution, but we need changes in policy. We also need changes to reform the capitalist system. There are those who are saying that capitalism is the root cause. Well, you know, there are serious problems in the form of capitalism that we have inherited, and we need reforms. We need to adopt the kind of multi-stakeholder approach that I referred to earlier, which means that we need to recognize all of the inputs, all of the outputs, and monetize them. You know, there's an old saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem begins to look like a nail. You could modify that by saying if the only tool we use to recognize value is a price tag, then those things that don't come with price tags attached may begin to seem as if they have no value. We have to lose that set of blinders and instead look at the value of clean air to breathe and clean water to drink and blue skies to marvel at, and a healthy environment in which to raise our families, and adopt the new approaches that are already proving to be more profitable, and make sure that these new opportunities include abundant new jobs for those who need a just transition.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Anupa Makun.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Gore, for your very passionate address. I'm Anupa Makund. I'm an MBA student at the Saïd Business School in Oxford. I'm joining in from Mauritius, which is where I'm from. And my question for you is, assuming that we can all agree that the environment is a global public good, and as you've outlined, the investment community has made important strides in aligning sustainability to profitability, what are some lessons for investing in other global public goods, be it health, human rights, or peace, especially given how interlinked these all are?
Well, thank you, Anupa, and congratulations to you as well. Another wonderful question. I mentioned in my last response to Daniel that we need reforms in our market system. And I would repeat that thought in beginning my answer to your question. You know, the way we measure value is based in part on accounting categories that originated a long time ago. During the period between World War I and World War II, a period marked by the Great Depression, economists were eager to give policymakers better, more efficacious tools to manage economic policy. One of the greatest was a man named Simon Kuznets, who won prizes for inventing what we call GDP. And the categories of accounting for value reflected in GDP form the basis of most corporate accounting categories. In 1937, when Kuznets was so frequently honored, he made in every speech a warning: please don't use these categories as a basis for national economic policy. But 7 years later at Bretton Woods, they were codified. So why was he saying they shouldn't be used? He said they had four defects. They did not measure the externalities, both negative and positive. Negative externalities are well known. The preeminent example is pollution, including the global warming pollution. They're just declared to be external to the way we think about these things. And so they were excluded from the calculations. Also, positive externalities, a category not as well known. But here's an example. If a community invests in mental health care or education, it's counted as an expense. But when the benefits of that investment in public goods come rolling back in the years and decades following, they're not counted as income. And so they are also excluded. Third, the depletion of natural resources are not included. That's why today, for every kilogram of grain produced in the American Midwest, several kilograms of topsoil are washed into the river systems and ultimately out the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico, contributing to dead zones. We're seeing the depletion of underground water resources, along with the topsoil and forests. And finally, he said we're not counting the distribution of incomes and net worths. And so what do we have today? When GDP goes up, there's a great cheer, but it's accompanied by these vast amounts of negative externalities like pollution, a chronic underinvestment in public goods like healthcare and education and mental health care and family supports. We're seeing the depletion of these resources, including the web of diversity with which we share this earth, known as the sixth great extinction now, unfortunately. And we're seeing hyper inequality of a kind that is threatening the survival of both democracy and capitalism in multiple geographies around the world. It's been 40 years since there's been any meaningful increase in take-home pay among middle-income families in my country. And we're seeing this hyper inequality in developing as well as developed nations. We have to take all of those defects in our current accounting for value and remedy them. And I'm sorry to be long-winded in my answer, Anupa, but you press my buttons with that question.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Tom McQuillan.
Hello, Mr. Gore, and thank you very much for your rousing call to action. I'm Tom McQuillan from Melbourne, Australia, and I'm currently an MBA student at Oxford Said Business School. We recently did a case on generation investment in our finance class and learned about the growth equity capital that you're injecting into businesses that have a positive impact on the world. That said, some of the problems we need to tackle, for example, decarbonisation of airlines and shipping, or long-term renewable energy storage, require significant early stage deep tech investment. Speaking to some of the teams working on these problems at Oxford, it seems like there's a funding gap, as some of these technologies are considered too risky or the payback period too long for traditional investors. How do you think we can accelerate funding of the truly innovative technology we need to run a net zero economy? And what role do you think that private and public investors have to play in allocating this funding?
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Congratulations to you as well. Another great question. I'm no longer surprised that these students are really asking terrific questions. You're quite right that in order to finance the sustainability revolution and navigate the tremendous transition that we have to make to a sustainable economy, we need private capital to be allocated in different ways. And one of the obstacles that we have to remove is the short-termism, you know the buzz phrase, the persistent short-term horizon of many investors. Some years ago, there was a well-known extensive survey in the US of CEOs and CFOs asking them a number of questions. One of the questions was a hypothetical. They were presented with the fact that they could make a large investment in their companies that would position their companies to be more profitable in the future, to be more competitive, and to be more successful in every way. However, if they decided to make this investment, it would mean that they would slightly miss their next quarter's projections for earnings per share. So, will you make the investment? 80% of the CEOs and CFOs said no, can't do it. Because if I miss my EPS estimate next quarter, markets will penalize me. And the incentive structure inside these companies also, of course, is often geared to a 90-day periodicity or an annual periodicity. So that's functionally insane. And it is a systemic indictment of the prevalence of short-term thinking in markets and in corporate finance. We have to change these compensation and incentive systems, and we have to follow the leadership of people like Paul Pullman and many of his colleagues who are part of this generation of corporate and business leaders who have said, no, there is a better way. And with the adoption of longer term incentive structures and with a systematic adoption of this holistic analysis of value, we can much more efficiently allocate capital to meet the needs and to seize the opportunities of this historic transition now looming before us.
Thank you, Mr. Gore.
Our final question comes from Sehar Tejpar.
Good morning, Mr. Gore. Thank you so much for your inspired and empowering comments and the renewal for our will to change. My name is Sehar Tejpar, and I'm also an Oxford MBA. I'm currently joining from Toronto, Canada. And my question for you is that from all of the lessons in your years of navigating policy, working with world and business leaders, and passionately educating the whole world on climate action, what is the one piece of essential advice that you would impart on us as future business leaders in our effort to move the needle on climate impact and the transition to a regenerative economy? Thank you.
Well, the most important advice I got when I was a student at a younger age in my education than you all are now, I had a great headmaster whose advice was, we all face the same choice in life over and over again. It's the choice between the hard right and the easy wrong. I have found that to be true on so many occasions in my life. And everybody knows, they may use a different phrase to describe it, but everybody knows situations where there's a little voice inside your consciousness that says, let's take another look at this. There's something not quite right about that. I have found in my life it is always, let me repeat, always a mistake to ignore that little voice. The final thing I would say is one of the great poets writing in the Spanish language from South America, Antonio Machado, once wrote, "Traveler, there is no path. You make the path by walking." That's where we are at this extraordinary juncture in human history. There's never been a moment like this one. I'm going to make a geeky phrase before I have a geeky phrase before I close. A technologist once said to me in discussing the ecological crisis, he said, "Al, what we're engaged in is an experiment to see whether the combination of a neocortex and an opposable thumb is a viable combination on this planet." We have great capacities. We also have limitations that have bedeviled us throughout human history. But we know that we're capable of making horrendous mistakes. But we also have the capacity of foresight. We have the capacity to work together. We are capable of more than we sometimes think we are. We here in the United States were inspired for all of our lives by Winston Churchill and the generation in the United Kingdom that stood on the ramparts and defended freedom. We are seeing freedom under challenge again now. We are also seeing, as I've said, the viability of human civilization, even potentially the survival of our species, under challenge right now. So if there was ever a moment when we were called upon to prove our ability to rise above those limitations, it is now. We have to make the path ahead. We're fortunate because pioneers have helped to show us the way. We are fortunate in having the tools and the technologies. What we need are new policies, and we need some new policy makers, and we need vision. In my faith tradition, there's a famous saying, where there is no vision, the people perish. But you can also say that where there is vision, we have the opportunity to create a better world. I'm inspired that those of you who are being honored today, who are part of this competition as well, inspire me because you are undertaking this challenge. Those of us who are older are honored to join you, and we can't pass on the responsibility to you. We have to help you, but we're counting on you. And in my remarks today, now concluding, my purpose has been not simply to honor those who have reached this stage. My purpose is also to recruit you. We need your help. So thank you again, congratulations again, and Godspeed.
Mr. Gore, thank you so very much. Thank you for your time today, but more importantly, thank you for your leadership. The sustainability revolution that you talked about is the work of our generation, but more so this younger generation. It is the biggest challenge facing the world, but as you point out, it's also one of the biggest opportunities facing the world too. And when we talk about resources, perhaps the scarcest resource that we need today is strong, principled, evidence-based leadership. And that's exactly what you've shown us for your entire lifetime. You've incited us not to give up, but to do the work that needs to be done to create a more just planet. If we were in person, Mr. Gore, I would kind of jump up and I would ask the crowd to give you an enthusiastic thank you. We can't do that. So the best I can do, yes, thank you. The best I can do is this little private one. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Okay. So as we move on to the second half of this program, just to make a transition, our work at Oxford Said is to educate these future leaders that Al Gore just talked about, who can not only run successful organizations like Paul Pullman has done, but also understand the systems that surround us and then work to protect people and planet. We do this in all of our programs at the Skoll Center, the Oxford Foundry, the Creative Destruction Lab, the Entrepreneurship Center. But in academia, nothing reflects your core values as much as your core curriculum. That's where you devote scarce time and resources of your students and your faculty. And for us, that means devoting our scarce time and our scarce resources to build the next generation of system leaders, of leaders like Paul Pullman and Al Gore. For the past 2 years, our course Global Opportunities and Threats Oxford, or GOTO, has been magnificently led by my colleagues Aoife Haney and Peter Droback. Dr. Aoife Haney is an expert on the interface between business and the environment, especially around issues of the energy. And in this spirit, she has a joint appointment between the Business School and the Smith School for Enterprise and Environment. Dr. Peter Droback is the director of the Skoll Center. He's a public health expert and a social entrepreneur, and spent more than a decade working with Paul Farmer to bring healthcare to the developing world through his work at Partners in Health and through the creation of the University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda. So to both of you, thank you as well. Thank you for all you've done. I'm going to turn it over to you to kick off the second half of our GOTO Summit. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you, Mr. Gore, for such an inspiring and passionate call to action. It is my absolute pleasure to lead us into this second half of our GOTO Climate Action Summit, where we're going to share the work of our students with you. And we're very excited about doing that. We've had almost 500 students, both our MBA and executive MBA students, from over 60 countries around the world, now scattered all over the world, working in teams on projects related to climate action since January. One of the things we want our students to take away from their GOTO experience is the importance of understanding the systemic nature of problems like climate before jumping to solutions. And that can be really difficult. Our students are very driven to finding solutions, and we want them to keep that drive. But we also want to make sure that that drive is targeted towards changing systems in response to the climate crisis. And they've really been doing us proud. They've been working really hard on their projects. We've had over 80 projects in total on a wide range of different topics. And today, it wouldn't be a business school event unless we had a little bit of competition. We've selected 4 finalist MBA teams to compete for over £10,000 in prize money. The teams for today have been selected by a panel of GOTO faculty who were really looking for projects that could lead to real-world impact, an impact on climate and on the current climate crisis. We are absolutely thrilled to have a panel of 3 expert judges with us today for the competition. And as you'll see in a moment, they are uniquely qualified to be able to support us in helping our students translate their ideas into impact. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how the competition is going to work in this second half of the GOTO Climate Action Summit, I'd like you to hear from our judges directly. Nigel, Arunma, Kaya, I'd like you to introduce yourselves and to tell us in these very strange and challenging times, what gives you hope? Nigel, I'd like to start with you.
Thanks, Aoife, and good afternoon, everybody. It's always tough to go after Vice President Gore, but it's really a pleasure to be here and see some old friends. Paul, good to see you on the call here. I didn't know you were going to be there. Good to see you. So my name's Nigel Topping. I'm the high-level climate action champion for COP26. Might get a chance to explain a bit more about what that's about later. What gives me hope now? Lots of things. I mean, the election of a government in South Korea on a manifesto of committing to net zero. The work of CEOs like Jesper Broden of IKEA and Ola Källenius at Daimler, who right now are publicly calling for bold, clean recovery packages. And then things like what I've just seen today, the French government's recovery package linking the bailout of Air France to very rapid decarbonisation of flying and mandates for sustainable aviation fuel. But I have to say, what's given me most hope the last couple of weeks has been getting to know Peter through Charmian, who many of you know, and hearing about how you're embedding climate change and systems thinking in the GOTO program at Oxford Side, and being part of judging this competition. It's really fantastic to see, and that gives me a lot of hope for the future. Thank you, Aoife.
Great, thanks very much, Nigel, and thank you so much for being here. Arunma, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what gives you hope?
Thank you, Aoife. Of course, the COVID-19 is an unprecedented crisis, but I've got so much that gives me hope. First, the crisis has shown many examples of the best of humanity, as illustrated by the heroic work of health workers around the world. Second, the crisis has already started creating so many opportunities. I've been struck by the speed of innovation, the numerous innovative solutions that I've seen here in the UK, here at University of Oxford, on the continent of Africa, and everywhere else. Third, and very important, is a greater realization that our world is borderless, and that the human race is one single family. Finally, I believe that the world will come out stronger, more resilient, and better out of this crisis. I really am honored to participate today as one of your judges. Thank you, Dean Tufano, and colleagues at Said.
Thank you, Arunma, and thank you for being with us today, and thank you for that hopeful message. Kaya, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what gives you hope?
Absolutely. I'm Kaya Axelson. I'm the Vice President of the Student Union at Oxford University. And it's been a long way coming since I remember crying my eyes out at the age of 8 years old when Vice President Gore was not elected to be our president in the US. But what does give me hope now is that when I was elected on an environmental platform to represent the student body at Oxford University, I had many wise mentors tell me that I should manage my expectations given the slow pace of institutional change. And they couldn't have been more wrong. 1 year later, Oxford has a new comprehensive sustainability strategy, a new net zero target with a meaningful plan to achieve net zero in our operations. Last week, we announced a divestment plan that includes engagement with not just fossil fuel companies, but companies across our portfolio. And most importantly, as Mr. Gore said, Oxford's greatest asset is its young people. So I'm so pleased to see programs like this one leading the way, and I hope to see more departments following in the steps of the business school. Thank you all so much for your incredible work throughout this competition.
Thank you so much, Kaya, and thank you, Nigel, Arunma, and Kaya, for being here with us as judges today. It's really inspiring to hear your hopeful messages as we start off this focus on the climate action projects that the students have been so hard working on throughout this year. I'd like to hand over to Peter now, who's going to introduce us to some of the nuts and bolts of the competition.
Thank you, Aoife, and thanks, Kaya, for just acknowledging that you were only 8 years old during the 2000 election. That makes the rest of us feel not so young. That's okay. Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Great to be with you. Thank you, Aoife. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Vice President Gore. Thank you, Paul. This is a big day for us, and we're excited for what's to come and let you hear from these amazing students who have been working for months on their projects. We've heard this already. What it's going to require to take the kind of action we need is a fundamental transformation of entire systems, our energy systems, our economic systems, our social and political systems. These things are bigger than any one person or organization can handle. And so we've seen this from Greta Thunberg and others. It's going to require systemic change in treating the system, not the symptoms. That's what GOTO is all about. And so you're not going to hear today a team that's just going to propose a game-changing app that's going to solve all of the world's problems, because it's not going to. What we're looking for is a much deeper analysis of complexity, and from that deeper understanding of the system, that unlocks new possibilities and solutions. And that's the heart of the kind of innovation that we need. And we'll hear from our students in just a moment. I want to just lay out what kind of the competition portion of this event is going to look like. So we've had, actually, there are nearly 500 MBA and exec MBA students here at the school, and all of them are working on climate action this year. And amongst the MBAs and the 56 teams, we have 4 teams that are going to be presenting today as finalists. Each team is usually about 6 MBA students, and they're presenting today from all across the world, because in the context of the pandemic, we're all scattered about. So every team is going to be able to present for 8 minutes, and then we're going to have a 5-minute Q&A portion that's going to be led by our judges. So 8 minutes presentation, 5 minutes Q&A. We'll hand over and go to the next group. The judges are going to be looking for an overview of the problem that the teams are working on, a deep analysis and a mapping of the system that they're looking at, and then from that analysis, a proposed intervention or kind of systemic shift that might help to address that problem. And we'll place strong weight today on the feasibility and the potential impact of that proposed intervention or systemic change idea. Now I say judges, but when I say judges, I actually mean all of you as well, because as you'll see, there are several prizes today, including an audience prize. So after the 4 presentations, we're going to have an opportunity for all of you who are participating today to actually vote on your favorite presentation, and we'll have an audience award, which will also have a monetary prize with it. So please do pay attention. Your vote counts, and we'll explain how you can vote when we get to that stage in the process. At this time, we are ready to kick things off. And so I'm going to introduce the first group. Every group has been given themselves a name. So this team is called Bezalel Gambia. And this team was looking at expanding renewable energy nationwide and transforming the energy system in the Gambia. The team includes Jessica, Tyler, Pascal, Anjali, Diana, and Momadu. Welcome, Team Bezalel Gambia.
My name is Momadu C. Prior to joining the MBA, I worked for the International Finance Corporation, leading our operations in the Gambia. The Gambia is a sliver of land on the west coast of West Africa with 2 million people, known as the Smiling Coast. After 2 decades of misrule with crumbling infrastructure and socio-economic decline, in 2016, the government changed for the better. But rebuilding the economy wasn't easy. We faced an energy crisis. People were getting 3 hours of electricity a day. The new government came up with a short-term solution, the Car Power Ship. Anchored off the coast of the Gambia, the ship generates 60% of Gambia's electricity supply, using highly pollutive heavy fuel oil. What was meant to be a temporary solution is now the new normal. Today, the Gambia is at a crossroads as it builds its energy infrastructure from scratch. Does the country give in to temptation with funding from international donors and its offshore oil reserves? Or does it choose to adopt renewable energy? I invited my GOTO teammates to help me rewire the system and capitalize on this historic opportunity to rethink growth based on renewable energy.
The government is currently working towards building an energy system which utilizes 20% renewable energy. We will spend the next 7 minutes demonstrating how this can be increased to 67% in the next 10 years. First, we will analyze the system by mapping out the key stakeholders and the connections that exist between them. Next, we will unwire the system and identify 2 underlying patterns which have prevented renewable energy solutions from scaling. Lastly, we will outline our proposed action plan comprised of 3 interventions which will allow us to rewire the system to the desired state.
To analyze the systems, we mapped out more than 60 stakeholders, which allowed us to understand their relationships, interconnections, and motivations. To really get to know each stakeholder, we conducted on-the-ground interviews and developed personas inspired by human-centered design. Where are the leverage points in the systems? What would be needed to convince the different stakeholders? Could they be influenced by external pressure? This in-depth analysis led us to an understanding of the underlying power dynamics. Locating them on this matrix with respect to interest in renewable energy and power, we were able to identify key players. This helped us to unwire the system.
After analyzing the complex relationships among the stakeholders, the underlying patterns become evident. Firstly, we found that there's a high level of policy inertia. The relationship between the government and the non-renewable energy sector is quite strong. Also, offshore oil and several agreements in the pipeline show that there's a powerful negative feedback loop. We frame this as short-termism, where key decision makers are favoring short-term gains despite long-term damages. Secondly, the much smaller renewable energy sector lacks access to capital. It's almost entirely supported by a few international funders. There's limited financial incentive for the private sector, especially for the large institutional investors. These two forces are keeping the epicenter of the system within the non-renewable energy sector, while the renewable energy solutions are failing to scale up.
There are 4 main interventions the Gambia has tried, but none have succeeded. One perfect example of short-termism is the car power ship situation alluded to earlier. Another is the cyclical bailout cycle of NAWEC, the country's national electricity provider by the government. These bailouts enable it to continue operating at a loss instead of forcing it to fix its underlying issues. This problem further complicates the Gambia's energy issues by making it hard to attract private investment. Any independent power providers will need to pair up with NAWEC, a consistently spendthrift ball and chain partner. Finally, even when policies are created that should boost the renewable energy sector, such as Gambia's Renewable Energy Act, these pieces of legislation lack meaningful financial incentives, such as basic funding or tax incentives.
Taking into account the learnings uncovered throughout our research, we brainstormed a range of interventions with the goal of increasing the contribution of renewable energy in the country. We then evaluated each intervention from both the potential impact and ease of implementation perspective in order to identify the solutions best suited to the Gambian context. Our 3 recommendations include an off-grid solution to allow direct-to-consumer sales, renewable energy imports from neighboring countries, and financing for a mega solar park in the country.
Our first intervention is off-grid solar. It highlights the potential for renewable energy provided by the private sector. The upsides here are ease of implementation, renewable energy for citizens, and creating success stories independent of the current system. To bring citizens, business, and renewable energy together, we have identified Unique Energy, an existing independent power provider in the Gambia with great potential for impact. The company has the technical skills, and we worked with them to provide a holistic overview of opportunities in the system. Currently, they are working on a 200-household proof of concept. We helped them to think how they could apply this proof of concept to open the door for a potential tender for future national level projects. We estimate that independent power providers such as Unique Energy can provide 20 megawatts of renewable energy over the next 2 to 3 years. Building upon the momentum from our first intervention, we held conversations with the World Bank. Instead of viewing renewable energy as an ad hoc solution, we encourage them to view the proposed renewable energy system as an asset for the country. In this spirit, our second intervention proposes collaboration between regional stakeholders, international funders, and renewable energy providers to supply renewable energy to the Gambia. Within neighboring countries, Senegal and Guinea, 2 hydro plants have the potential to supply 40 megawatts of renewable energy to the Gambia. How can we scale? On the one hand, we have government and international funders, whereas on the other, private sector and renewable energy. And we believe we have found a way to align all of their interests. Building on the successes of similar projects in Senegal and Morocco, and our team's expertise in the finance sector, we created a proposal for a special purpose vehicle for a 150 megawatt solar park. We believe establishing a bankruptcy remote special purpose vehicle achieves a best of both worlds outcome, whereby private enterprises can partner with NAWEC while isolating relevant assets and liabilities from potential parent-level bankruptcy claims. Through the implementation of our proposed interventions, we weaken the negative feedback loops that used to keep money in the hands of non-renewable energy companies. We also shift the epicenter of our system away from foreign non-renewable energy companies towards an ecosystem built upon regional collaboration and local allocation of renewable energy.
Our group name Besalal means renewable. Every Gambian now talks about the new Gambia. I'm confident with our simple proposals, we can empower companies like Unique Energy to build a bridge to the future and give hope to other countries that there's another path to shared and sustainable prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, and let's turn it over to our judges for the Q&A, and the first question will come from Nigel.
Thank you, Peter, and congratulations to the team. Great presentation. Love the way you've broken down the challenge. My question is about the mega solar park project in particular. I'd just like to hear a bit more about where the funding is going to come from, what you've done to make this investable in a way that previous projects were not investable.
Thanks for that question, Nigel, and thank you all from the team for the opportunity to be here today. So the special purpose vehicle would be designed to try to keep the assets bankruptcy remote. As we were talking about, NAWAC has some issues where it's been in a cyclical state of bankruptcy. Now, according to the World Bank's Doing Business report, there are some concerns about when secured creditors would get funding. My colleague Momodu is actually part of a government task force that's working on making Gambia, or working with the government to make Gambia more favorable to creditor funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe I can just add, thank you very much for the GOTO team for this opportunity. I would like to add that there are several sources of funding that we can access for this mega solar project. But the way that we looked at the system, it will feed in from the initial Unique Energy, a small scale proof of concept. Then we already have the regional interlinkages, part of the West African power pool coming in. And the third aspect is the 150 megawatt, which is kind of the big project coming up. The World Bank has just finished the feasibility study. They haven't come up with the financing mechanism yet. But what we are proposing is to, especially at SPV, which can be protected from intervention from the government and all those investment risks, needs to be structured very well. What we can add to that is there are several opportunities, like the IFC, for example, can come in with some private sector investment, which would be kind of supported by MIGA, which is the World Bank side that provides investment guarantees. And then you can attract foreign investment coming in. And Gambia is also part of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which Gambia has chosen energy as their top priority. So the MCC is a US government funding agency that has some basic kind of 12 indicators that a country has to qualify for, and then they'll give them pretty much a lot of pretty much unlimited funding. And Gambia has chosen renewable energy or energy as one of the sectors that the MCC should look at. So if Gambia does that, we'll be able to have all those funding sources coming in.
Great, thank you.
Ask you to pause your question there, or your answer there, thank you, and we'll go on to the next question, please.
I'll ask the next question, but let me start by also congratulating you for making it as one of the finalists and for an excellent presentation. I would like to understand better how what the business model is and how it will be sustainable in delivering energy to users.
I think what makes our interventions kind of feasible is the sequence that we deliver them and what kind of stakeholders we identified to create like a sustainability beyond the financial kind of cent game, which is currently really messed up. So, for example, the government really sells the energy currently for a price that is below the actual production cost. So when we compare this with the long time estimate for the solar park and everything, really we can cut down the costs. And at the same time, it's also through this sequence of actions we take, it's ensured that it's kind of done in a sustainable way. So, for example, our first stakeholder, Unique Energy, is well positioned to among this group of renewable energy providers because it already has some credibility in the market, and that's why we believe it's doing the step-by-step approach. It will be sustainable in the long run.
Yeah, and maybe we have something that Unique Energy sent us, but Aruna, just to add that, as you might probably know, and a lot of the panelists will know, in this country, it's really difficult to change a model that is based on donor government and some special interests to a model that is more sustainable, to have good businesses like the Unique Energy, which is doing tremendous work, investing their own capital on the ground. But they have certain challenges that they can really walk through. It's not really that difficult. So we think this is the lowest hanging fruit for us. So maybe, just after that, we can elaborate, but that's the main point, just move it from one end to another.
Thank you very much, team. Well done. To all of you watching out there, you're welcome to cheer and clap for this fantastic presentation. Maybe they can't hear you, but I'm sure they can feel your energy. So round of applause. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Aoife to introduce our next team.
Great. Thanks very much, Peter. And we're going to move on to our second team now, the Eco Bites. So Farah, Niranjan, Zuhair, Marvin, and Omara have been looking at the carbon impacts of the growth of electricity for data centers. So let's hear from them.
I'd like to start off by asking you a question. What did you do this morning? Chances are you rolled over and reached for your phone before you drew the curtains. You may even have checked an email before breakfast. And given the current transition to an online MBA, I can say with certainty you spent most of the day glued to your computer screen. But where does the energy for all these activities come from? We are tackling a deeply personal yet invisible problem. Our world has grown to be so dependent on the internet that the stage is set for this to be a global threat, not because of security and privacy, but because of its carbon emissions. My name is Farah, and we are the Ecobites. Today I'll share with you our journey, where we discover where the internet is located, understand how it is powered, and propose solutions for a cleaner cloud. That Google search you did this morning accounted for 7 grams of emissions, equivalent to boiling a pot of tea. An email with an attachment accounts for 50 grams. That's like leaving a 60-watt light bulb on for 1 hour. Today, the internet creates 3.5% of greenhouse gases, more than shipping and aviation, and is projected to rise to 14% by 2040. This graph compares the electricity consumption of the IT sector to that of entire countries. Energy requirements to power hardware, run computations, and cool server stacks are astoundingly greater than that of major countries such as Russia, Japan, and India. So where does all this occur? San Francisco and Silicon Valley may first come to mind when imagining the home of data companies, but in fact, the physical, beating heart of the internet lies in Virginia, on a strip of land known as the Data Center Alley. This is the very spot through which 70% of the world's internet traffic is passed. Data centers in Virginia fall into 4 groups: facilities that power internet platforms, such as Facebook and Google, cloud computing centers that sell power and storage, like Amazon Web Services, government centers, and co-location centers operated by digital landlords who lease out space to companies such as Apple and Uber. The electricity demand from these centers continues to grow at a dramatic rate, sharing the same requirements as 9 large coal power plants. All this energy has to come from somewhere. Virginia's largest electricity provider, a monopoly, is a company we see rooted at the heart of this problem, Dominion Energy. Dominion has resisted transition to renewables, currently making up only 4% of its mix, and which it plans to increase only slightly to 10% by 2030. It is crucial to highlight that Virginia's laws prevent companies from breaking free of Dominion's grip, with the only ways out having large power demands or being 100% renewable. Dominion lies at the heart of the system. Data centers in blue are dependent on Dominion for power, and a few companies source from renewable energy providers in green or purchase credits to offset their emissions. Some companies have tried to lobby Dominion into renewables through media and activists in yellow. Certain companies, however, share investors such as BlackRock with Dominion, leading to decision paralysis and inaction. There's also a negative feedback loop between legislators in Brown and Dominion, as Dominion reportedly donates to political candidates and has tax breaks disincentivizing a shift to renewable energy. So where are the levers in this map? We'd like to highlight a few. Legislators may break the monopoly of Dominion. Data users may pressurize companies directly, and data companies may place collective pressure on Dominion to offer more renewable energy. This leads us into the existing solutions landscape. Our research has identified 4 current solution categories. Within power consumption, data companies can offset existing emissions through renewable energy certificates and power purchase agreements. In Virginia, Apple has managed to opt out of Dominion and shift to 100% renewable energy. Policy opportunities differ by context. GDPR in the EU may protect citizen data, but in fact has also led to a daily savings of emissions equivalent to a full passenger flight from London to New York. Solutions to improve cooling include using AI to improve data center efficiencies or housing centers in colder climates. Finally, innovations such as dropping data centers into the ocean or launching them into space take advantage of lower temperatures, but need to consider negative externalities. We would like to build on these and propose 4 stakeholder-led categories of interventions. Consumers, such as you and I, may not be able to stop using the internet, but we can raise awareness and place pressure on data companies to abide by more sustainable standards. To switch from Netflix, who relies on Amazon Web Services, for example, may not please users, but would certainly place pressure on a company currently responsible for 1/3 of internet traffic. Shareholders have immense ability to influence current practice. BlackRock CEO's commitment to climate action at the beginning of this year has the potential to drive Dominion to increase renewable energy. An example of this is in the financial industry, is that of Share Action, a UK nonprofit that successfully coordinated a shareholder resolution pushing Barclays to reduce its non-renewable investments in January this year. Industry can also shift practices, both by the pressure they place on suppliers and internal incentives such as carbon taxes. This requires strong company leadership and cultural change and commitment. And finally, policy plays a key role in this story. Virginia law can not only open the door for those who want to opt out of the monopoly, but also force Dominion to reach certain targets. A strong theme underpinning our research was that despite vocal lobbyists such as Greenpeace, policy in Virginia had not yet changed. That is, until just a few weeks ago. One of our recommendations came into reality. In March, Virginia passed the Clean Economy Act. The bill outlines steadily decreasing use of coal and oil and demands Dominion reach 100% renewables by 2045. This is fantastic. The new law is a serious move to bring Dominion to the table. The question left to ask is this enough? It is clear that Virginia's energy sector is a complex system of stakeholders and interests, all rooted into an outdated and dirty utility company. This against the backdrop of an increasingly global need for data usage. We've already surpassed aviation emissions. Who knows what's next? We hope this presentation has left you as shocked, perplexed, and curious as we have been throughout this module. And we hope it has triggered you to ask the questions that may initiate change. Thank you.
Great, thank you on the Farah and the EcoBytes. We now have two questions from our judges. And the first question is from Kaya.
Hi, thank you so much. What a great presentation. Close to my home, actually. So you've mapped the system well and identified a sensitive intervention point, but you've mentioned multiple possible interventions. What specifically are you proposing as a new intervention or a way of bringing these multiple interventions together?
Yeah, I can take that and Amara can add. Thank you so much for the question. So yeah, we identified broadly the consumer side, the policy side, shareholders, and internal companies. But each one has their own advantages and disadvantages. Looking at a very recent model, which happened in January this year, where ShareAction put pressure on Barclays, taking across around 100 odd individual investors and changing their style of investing and moving away from non-renewable resources. We feel a similar plan could have a strong effect where you have an external agency who's bringing across a lot of shareholders who otherwise would not place so much pressure on a company. So I think that was the one which we identified. And parallelly at the same time, a legislation change came into effect. And Amara, you want to add on that? Sorry, I think you're muted, Amara. Okay, I'll just go ahead. So I think the legislation change as well came into effect, but that was very, very recent. And I think the cause of that happening was, again, a lot to do with the politics, because only last year in late 2019, we had the House of Senate and the other house basically changing political parties. And then now we have clean energy as a focus, but probably that's not enough. That's just one trigger, which has happened whilst we were going about this project. So I think at the end of the day, we are looking at shareholder action as one key driver.
Great, thank you very much, Niranjan. And we have our second question from Arunma for the EcoBytes.
Thank you. My second, but before that, congratulations again on making it as a finalist, and thanks again for another excellent presentation. My question is really about levers. All the IT companies have committed to 100% renewables. So maybe you can clarify for us how you would leverage the IT companies to encourage the Virginia State Legislature to be more ambitious about the targets, because you said they've now committed to 2045, but many of the IT companies are committing to 2030.
Yes, thank you. This should be working. So this is something that we certainly were thinking about. Something when we talk about these IT companies, we're talking about Google, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, Apple. And so if you look on their websites, they all have proudly proclaimed that they are all 100% renewable energy, or have been for the past 3 or 5 years. Amazon doesn't state that they are currently powered by 100% renewable energy, but that they are working towards it. And something that is pretty challenging is getting into, and something that we really combated while trying to figure out and make this map, was the idea of when you say you're renewable, what does that mean? And when it's great to put out a press release and say, I'm supporting renewable energy across the US, but we are particularly interested in how these companies and also commercial leaders like Costco or Walmart in the Virginia area could leverage their power with the local legislature and with Dominion in order to say, we want more renewable energy here where we are getting our energy. And so we believe that that was actually a key aspect in addition to the Democrats coming into power with in order to pass this legislation to push Dominion towards us.
Yeah, and just adding one last thing. So it's very important to look at the difference between carbon neutral, which is offsetting your emissions, versus actual carbon zero or carbon negative, where you're actually removing or stopping all emissions. And I think companies have started moving towards or putting in targets of carbon neutral, which is offsetting, but to actually get to negative or zero is where we probably need to be. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much to the EcoBytes, and we're all clapping and smiling a lot in our homes, but you can't hear us, but we share the love. And I'm going to hand over to Peter to take us to our third team.
Thanks, Aoife, and thank you, EcoBytes. That was terrific. Now we're going to move to something completely different again. There's amazing diversity in all of these projects. And our next topic is actually something that Paul Pullman has done some amazing work on with this group Imagine, and that's sustainability in the fashion industry. So I'm really pleased to introduce our third team. They call themselves the Heroes of Environmental Management Progress, also known as HEMP, itself a sustainable material. And this team includes Freya, Peyton, Yulia, Alexander, Kan, and Sahar. And as I mentioned, they are looking at the use of unsustainable materials and manufacturing techniques in the fashion industry. So Team HEMP, take it away.
I have sewn and made clothes since I was young. I love making clothes that enable people to feel at home in their own bodies. I sew because I want to, not because I have to. In stark contrast, Farida is a young garment worker in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and she sews because her family and her country depend on it. She is 22 years old, and her wages support her young son and her mother-in-law. Her wages contribute to the biggest driving force in their economy, the apparel sector. For many, including our group, fashion is a way to express ourselves, but to many others, it is a livelihood. It is an exploitative, destructive, and carbon-intensive way of life, and this is why any transition to a sustainable model has to be hand in hand with economic and social support for these producing countries. In the last 2 decades, textile production has produced 1.2 billion tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions, more than those of all international flights and maritime shipping trips combined. By 2050, fashion's share of the global carbon emissions pie will be 25%. Alongside this is the cost of inaction. Business as usual could cost the fashion industry $52 billion in impact to employment, land, and natural resources. The fashion industry knows that it needs to change, and the change goes right to the very heart of the industry, requiring a shift to sustainable fabrics. But how can we get there?
From our research, we saw an imbalance in the value chain regarding emissions and attention. The first part of the value chain is responsible for over 70% of industry emissions, which is the majority of emissions across the entire chain. And this part of the value chain is also most in need of financial support to change.
So if we know which part of the chain stands most to gain from transformation, what is holding the industry back? From our interviews, the answer was clear. The materials exist, but they're not scalable. To address these issues, a focus on consumers won't help. Buy less is not the answer. We need to enable a transition to sustainable fabrics by allowing the fashion industry to continue scaling, but without the drastic environmental impact. To better understand the disconnects in the transition to sustainable fabrics, we created the systems map. The first loop is a designer loop including fashion companies and individual designers. The second loop is a manufacturer loop with suppliers, manufacturers, and governments. And the third loop connects the 2 loops to create the whole fashion system. There are 3 key disconnects in our map. The first is in profit distribution. Climate impact is most profound in the first half of the value chain, but profits are pulled in the second half, where 3 times the value is realized by the brand markup. The second is a disconnect between designers and sustainable sourcing that presents a real challenge to decreasing dependency on virgin materials, as designers' decisions determine 80% of garment carbon footprint. Lastly, there is a need to consider how we might upskill workers or adapt farming practices in emerging economies when developing potential solutions.
To identify where we could make the biggest impact, we reviewed the existing solution landscape and found positive interventions in 5 areas. Firstly, certification, which allows buyers to differentiate sustainable suppliers. Secondly, sustainability indexes, which provide a consistent measurement platform for brands and the supply chain. Thirdly, innovative fabrics and sustainable fibers, which could reduce reliance on carbon-intensive materials. Fourthly, sustainable fashion incubators, which accelerate the growth of early-stage startups. And lastly, dedicated financing for sustainable fashion transition, with the first dedicated fund launched in 2019. While these changes are important, we still need to solve for three key challenges. Number one, the disconnect between designers and sustainable supply chains. Number two, bridging the gap in funding as dedicated financing currently falls short of the $20 to $30 billion required. And number three, achieving a just transition for all stakeholders.
The fashion industry has been slow to implement sustainable solutions. The intervention we propose uses technology and funding to make this transition seamless. Our first intervention is the implementation of AI sustainable sourcing software. Currently, designers send a tech pack to manufacturers that contains instructions to turn a design into a finished product. This tech pack contains no information on sustainable fabrics, so we want to create an AI-based software to scan the tech pack and offer alternative sustainable materials for any given design. Sourcing sustainable materials is difficult, and our software would enable designers and manufacturers to source these materials with ease. However, additional funding is necessary to finance this transition and to retrain local cotton farmers who would be at a loss due to an increase in demand for sustainable materials. To address this financing gap, we would like to create the Textile Innovation Fund. The Textile Innovation Fund will financially support suppliers in producing countries to develop innovative, sustainable materials and retrain their workforce for a sustainable industry. It will be based in the UK, but will have in-country liaisons in countries with dominant garment and agricultural sectors such as Bangladesh and Vietnam. It will use revenue from the TechPack software as seed funding and will use a blended finance approach with both grant funding and debt financing utilized. Finally, to enable a just transition, funding will be provided to communities and farmers to upskill given the potential loss of business. The Textile Innovation Fund fills a current gap in the market to finance new initiatives that allow the fashion industry to move towards a sustainable future.
The interventions we propose form a closed-loop system, connecting previously disconnected stakeholders. The AI-based TechPack software and the Textile Innovation Fund create a new, positive, reinforcing loop, increasing demand for sustainable materials and providing support to producing countries to meet that demand and support their economies. We expect that stakeholders will have differing needs to consider. Two key challenges came to mind: burden of cost and just transition. When it comes to cost, fashion companies and manufacturers may be early resistors. Changing mental models and the idea of what industry growth looks like is fundamental to owning a new business model. Effective change will also require new pricing strategies that consider profitability across the value chain. Farmers' livelihoods will be impacted as new alternatives such as banana leaf or eucalyptus are explored. An appetite to test and iterate before moving to scale, as well as partnerships with NGOs, development agencies, farming coalitions, and impact investing funds, alongside farmers themselves, will be central to navigating this change. 25 and 52. If we return to those two figures we shared at the start, 25% as fashion's expected share of the global carbon emissions pie by 2050, and $52 billion as the cost to industry if nothing changes, one thing becomes clear. We stand much more to gain in terms of financial progress for the industry, support to the livelihoods which keep clothes on our backs, and preservation of our planetary boundaries and natural resources by aligning the fashion industry to the changes imminent in the world around us. In this decade of delivery for the SDGs, asking fashion to deliver on the goals of responsible growth and climate action isn't just better for the environment or for livelihoods, it's better for business. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Team Hemp, for that fascinating presentation. We will move it on now to our 5-minute Q&A period. And the questions, Kaya.
Thank you so much for the fascinating presentation. The first question that I have is, from the design perspective, have you worked with designers, and how feasible do you think it will be to integrate the AI software that you mentioned with their design packs?
So I can take that question. I actually studied fashion design and I am a fashion designer, and so a lot of my friends and colleagues were in the design world. So we've spoken extensively with designers and also sourcing managers and supply chain managers. And it would be really easy to implement because essentially there's a small number of types of software used currently for fashion design and creating tech packs, and using the type of software we've been looking at would fit really easily into these, because you can create very simple kind of coding devices that categorize the type of information and convert a tech pack into the information that we could then use in sourcing. And so it's a great question because it's a really important part of the process. And yes, we have spoken with lots of designers.
Peter, you're on mute, but I know I'm up next, so I'll go. Great presentation and really good topic. I know one that's dear to Paul's heart. Mine's really to follow up from Kaya's question about the sort of competitiveness landscape and the analysis. You know, producing an AI tool is a good way of burning millions and millions of dollars. What did you do to compare existing solutions which might be usable or extensible in a faster way, such as life cycle assessment software or the kind of Higg index from the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which designers are using in some major fashion houses?
Yeah, so the key difference between us and competitors is that a lot of those happen in the supply chain teams, and 80% of the environmental impacts of garments are decided at the design stage. And so we really wanted something that hits people where they don't actually have to take the decision on themselves, because having gone to fashion design school, we didn't ever get taught about sustainability. We didn't get taught about what the fibers are and how to make those decisions and what the environmental impacts were. And so we really wanted to make something that takes that decision out of people's and individuals' hands and actually inserts it right in. And so life cycle assessments, I think a lot of those types of things, they depend on the designers themselves, and it's not part of the education curriculum at the moment in design schools, so we didn't really want to rely on that.
Thank you.
If I may add something to Freya. If I may add, just to say that the systems analysis is actually also what pointed us in this direction. We spent a lot of time thinking about the value chain, and because of systems mapping, we realized exactly where the breakdown was. And we wanted to draw attention to the fact that this is a problem that is faced by the first half of the value chain, but the entire value chain really needs to come together to scale a solution effectively.
Great, thanks. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, team. Very well done. Virtual applause, everyone, for Team Hemp. And I will turn it back over to Aoife to introduce our fourth and final team today.
Thank you very much, Peter. I can't believe we're actually already at the fourth and final team. So we are now about to hear from Team Searching for Shangri-La. And this is another very different topic. So the team has been looking at challenges for an indigenous community of adapting to the pressures of climate change and economic growth, a topic that tends to be quite overlooked. So it's nice to see a focus on indigenous communities in this project. And the team is composed of Carlos, Ria, Elizabeth, Lynn, Sabrina, and Juan Camilo. So let's hear from them.
When I came to Oxford last year, we were challenged to rethink growth. I couldn't help but think of my experience in Ladakh, a land and peoples in danger of losing environmental stability and cultural identity in the pursuit of economic growth. And that's when we started our search for Shangri-La. I sit beside Padma Stanzin in her kitchen as she stirs a pot of dal. She is my host at a homestay next to one of Ladakh's gorgeous glacial lakes. I ask her how long she's lived here. She tells me it's been 2 years. 2 years since she and her husband sold off the remainder of their 400 goats after an especially cold winter decimated the flock. Now their family depends on the seasonal income from tourism and some extra from weaving pashmina. Her daughter walks into the kitchen, home from boarding school for the first time in 6 years. The rest of the village is eerily devoid of youngsters, all former apprentices now looking for new trades. This story to me highlighted the twin defining systemic challenges of our century, overcoming poverty and managing climate change. And the Ladakhi people, like most indigenous peoples, are the most vulnerable to climate change impacts and exploitative economic development. Climate change has already had a large impact in Ladakh. Glaciers are melting, weather patterns are changing, disrupting traditional livelihoods. And economic development and modernization threaten Ladakhi identity. The influx of tourists has had serious impacts on the fragile ecosystem and how the Ladakhi people see themselves. But there is hope. In October 2019, Ladakh received Union Territory status. This is the first step to greater self-determination for the region. In this moment, Ladakh finds itself at a crossroads. It is this context that shaped our journey to find answers to the question, how can the people of Ladakh strengthen their cultural heritage while adapting to pressures of climate change and economic growth? Carlos will now take you through the drivers behind these challenges in our proposed intervention, with Sabrina then explaining the rationale behind it.
With Ria's passion driving us forward, we undertook a detailed systems analysis, engaging local stakeholders and experts worldwide. We quickly realized that Ladakh must overcome three entrenched mindsets. The first is the view that nature is a resource to exploit. The second, the view that material wealth is the sign of prosperity and well-being. The third, the view that Ladakhi knowledge and culture is inferior to other modern cultures. Disrupting these mindsets is critical to change the underlying structures and patterns currently in Ladakh. Further analysis helped us to identify three building blocks that our intervention must amplify: building climate resilience and adaptation, embedding regenerative economic development, and empowering Indigenous knowledge and culture. It was with these three building blocks in mind that we designed our intervention, which we're excited to share with you today. Our primary intervention is to create the Ladakh Climate Resilient Development Leadership Council that is locally led to ensure self-determination, multi-sector to connect efforts across silos, and multi-generational to cultivate intergenerational cultural exchange. The purpose of the Council is to act as a system orchestrator to scale the impact of climate-resilient social businesses. We designed three levers that the Council can use to achieve this purpose. The first is the Ladakh Regenerative Business Certification. We believe the certification can supercharge the regenerative business ecosystem by redirecting tourist dollars and government and private investment. The second lever is to foster intercultural knowledge bridges, who act as system intermediaries to bridge the gap between Indigenous knowledge and modern scientific inquiry and business innovation. We believe this can ensure local Indigenous communities benefit from the new economy, and it can create ripple effects to unfreeze entrenched mindsets that devalue Ladakhi culture and knowledge. Our third lever is to influence and change government regulation and policy. We believe the Council can provide a unified voice to create space for climate-resilient social businesses to thrive. Our three levers and our intervention address three current challenges in the solutions landscape. Currently, there is no system goal. Our intervention focuses efforts towards climate-resilient development. There are unclear pathways for scale. Our intervention does exactly that, create pathways for local, climate-resilient businesses to scale. And a deeply held mindsets remain. We hope that our intervention helps to unfreeze these mindsets and empower local communities.
In order to gain a better understanding of our solution, let's look at the highlights of our system analysis. There are multiple stakeholders, but the key players are highlighted in blue. For a remote region, it's extremely complex, and it was here we first realized the story of Padma is unfortunately all too common for the Indigenous community. As tourism creates more strain on the environment, people can no longer support themselves using traditional agriculture, and then therefore turn to industry like tourism as a viable career. This creates more strain on the environment as well as devaluing Indigenous culture. This loop made us gain curiosity for cause and effect, so therefore we created a full systems loop analysis. We identified two impact points: leveraging sustainable development already occurring in the region and adapting the region's agricultural industry. This led us to the conclusion that our solution must create a monetary incentive that can drive the more difficult challenge of creating ripples and shifting mindsets. But what we're most excited to share with you is that our intervention touches on multiple points in the system, which is necessary to create systemic change. Structural changes come in the form of new policies, practices, and resource flows that encourage regenerative business models and incorporate indigenous knowledge. Relational changes revolutionize power dynamics between the Ladakhi people, the government, and business. And finally, transformative change blossoms as climate-resilient business models and the Ladakhi people come to the forefront of society. In addition, our model can be adapted to meet the uncertain futures that can meet Ladakh. We use two metrics when planning these situations: culturally inclusive growth and climate resilient growth. This resulted in three most likely versions, two of which will require us to enact Lever 1 first to create an economic incentive. But what we're thrilled to share with you is Sapiens Integra, which our team affectionately refers to as Shangri-La, a vision where the Ladakhi people lead the region's development, utilizing their own indigenous knowledge to create a climate-resilient ecosystem. Our team started with one initial guiding principle, that climate change is at its core a human problem, and therefore people need to be the solution. It was this idea that led us down a path to search for alternative economic models, resulting in an analysis of Ladakh. We are confident that if the region can enact our three levers of change, it will have a bright future. Changing climate is a threat to humanity, but it also creates the unique opportunity to reflect on our growth obsession. We hope that you enjoyed searching for Shangri-La and can see a new future for Padma and her family, one that can push us all to tackle our own twin challenges of overcoming poverty and taking climate action, all with the wisdom that what should truly be exponential is not GDP growth, but our respect for each other and the planet.
Great, thank you very much to our final team on their presentation, Searching for Shangri-La. So now we have a question from Arumna.
Thank you, Aoife. Again, congratulations on being a finalist of the GOTO Summit this year. Another excellent presentation. I'd like to understand better how the Ladakh Leadership Council, which is a key driver for the system that you've thought about, will influence the political landscape at the state level and at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I'll jump in and quickly answer. So what Ria explained at the very beginning is that Ladakh is at a very important moment in its political history. It's recently been given Union Territory status, which means that it has an opportunity to increase its self-determination. The next step in that is to get Schedule 6 status, which means it becomes a designated tribal region in India. But what's currently happening in the region is that there's lots of individuals putting forward this motion and trying to influence government. There are mechanisms in place that look at things across Ladakh, such as education and other reforms. But we believe the council can be different in that it focuses on development and the business environment. And the three things we talked about, so being locally led, there are probably 4 key stakeholders locally who will play a really important role, and we would love them to be involved in this. Jamyang Sering Namgo, who's a local MP who already has influence with the central government as an MP and is well known for his impassioned speech that he gave in Parliament. Sonam Wangchuk, who is an educational reformer as well as an innovator. He is also very well known across India. Dr. Sering Stobdan, who's a pioneer in agricultural innovation in the region, who's innovated things like greenhouse farming, as well as plastic mulching to increase yields. And then His Eminence Drukpa Tuksi Rinpoche, who's a religious leader who has a lot of influence across the region as well. And they're already involved in interventions that are happening in the system. What we hope the council does is bring them all together, think about what businesses can do in the region, and then implement solutions that unify those solutions in the current landscape and scale them. And I just want to make one last point about this. It needs to be multi-generational. We were told by many stakeholders on the ground that it's really important for young people to be involved in this process. Echoing what Paul Polman and what Al Gore was saying previously. They're seen as the future of the region. 20% leave Ladakh to pursue higher education without knowing whether there's opportunities for them back in Ladakh. And so this approach and intervention hopes to build an ecosystem where they can come back and contribute to the future of their region.
Thank you very much, Carlos. And we're going to move on to our last question for our last team, which comes from Nigel.
Great. Well, thanks, team. I love the way you've humanized the system by naming real individuals and telling the story of Padma at the beginning. I wondered if you could, you talked about her income coming from seasonal tourism and weaving pashmina. I wonder if you could bring the solution to life by maybe joining the dots between her current livelihood and how your interventions would specifically impact her and therefore just by extension the rest of the community. You could tell Padma's future story.
I think I'll take that question. And Carlos, if you want to add later, you can go ahead. So I think 2 or 3 of the biggest things that we found when we looked into the system was that there was no opportunity for viable, sustainable livelihoods in the region, which caused a lot of out-migration from the region of Ladakh. This was where, if you heard Padma's daughter, she came home after 6 years in boarding school. So this is something that also joins up with the loss of cultural heritage within the region, because students are sent away at the age of 13 and they come back when they're young adults already foreign to the region. So by creating sustainable opportunity within the region through our business certification, which also has an aspect of involving locals within your particular business as one of the criteria for the certification, this is a problem that would solve. And secondly, by creating sustainable opportunities like sustainable tourism, that is ecotourism, where Padma could be involved by hosting people at her own home without having any negative impacts on the environment, and also creating wealth for her and her family. We hope to address these issues through the intervention.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add that so eco homestays are there, but they're a very small fraction of the market share at the moment. Most tourism is not done in a sustainable way. So we hope to supercharge that ecosystem of more sustainable business models, so that people like Padma and others can see that as a viable future at scale, not just for certain individuals within the community. And the other thing I wanted to add is just the idea of intercultural knowledge bridges. We thought was really important to empower local communities so that they understand that their solutions and their ideas and their knowledge is being implemented by the council and by people who are going into the region to develop the region. Money isn't a problem.
We're going to have to come to a close now, unfortunately, because we're coming to time. But thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you, judges, for all your questions. Peter is now going to explain what's going to happen next.
Thanks. That was so much fun hearing from all of you. We are now going to allow our judges to escape the Zoom chat for a few moments so that they can deliberate. Aoife will be accompanying the judges, and they'll have just a few minutes to do their deliberations. And meanwhile, we are going to be doing a bit of deliberating of our own. So you should see a slide coming up onto the screen. And it's time for the audience vote. So all of you at home, around the world, wherever you are, we want to hear from you. If you go to the link on the screen, that's www.menti.com. There'll be a place to enter a code, and you enter the code 8237, as you can see here on the screen. Go to the next slide, Fraser, please. If you go to that link and enter that code, you'll see a very simple survey where you choose one of the 4 presentations today that you thought hit all the marks, and particularly had a proposed intervention that had real feasibility and potential to drive a systemic positive change. So we're just doing about a 3-minute voting period for the audience, and then I wanted to share a few other thoughts with you before the judges come back. I would play some nice background music at this time, but we were told that YouTube's algorithms would shut us down if we chose anything copyright protected. So you're just going to have to deal with the silence. The audience prize is worth £1,800 so it's quite a nice prize and quite meaningful for these students. So your vote really does matter. We want to encourage you to indeed vote. I want to make sure that judges, if they haven't already, are going to their separate Zoom where they'll be able to confer and deliberate, and then come back into the Zoom that we're hosting. If judges have any questions, they can ask them in the chat. One more minute for audience voting. Any judges who are having trouble with their deliberation room, if you look in the chat, there should be a link there. Just click the link in the chat and that'll go to the judges' room. Okay, time to wrap up your voting. If you haven't had a chance yet to vote, look at the link on the screen, menti.com, code 8327. The 4 teams are Besalal Gambia, Team Ecobites, Team Hemp, which was the fashion team, and Searching for Shangri-La, looking at sustainable development in Ladakh. That poll will close down in a moment, and those votes will be silently tallied, and we'll announce the audience winner in just a few moments as soon as the judges are back. And this time we're going to move forward, and I just wanted to share a few things with you while we wait for the judges. You know, the first is that this day and this event is the culmination of really 6 months of hard work by our students here. We kicked off actually in November of last year, and these students have worked together very hard in the midst of a very busy MBA program and in the midst of a pandemic. It's been nearly 6 weeks now since University of Oxford closed its physical doors, and our students come from over 65 countries around the world, and for various reasons, many of them have gone to their home countries or gone elsewhere. And so they've had to continue with their studies and continue with this work through these really extraordinary challenges. And it's a testament to their commitment to these causes, their passion for the work, and real determination that they've been able to put together such amazing projects. And for those of you who are hearing about GOTO for the first time, we did something really fun this year, and we actually created a little documentary series that allowed you to sort of be a fly in the wall and walk in the shoes of an Oxford MBA student during their GOTO process. And so this has been ongoing and is still, and we're just going to take about 30 seconds here to show you the trailer from that documentary series.
Climate change, or the climate emergency, is the defining issue of our time.
We have to start now making radical changes.
500 MBA and executive MBA students at a big business school, all working on climate change at the same time.
I do think that a few of the people here in the class will move the needle on climate action within the next 20 years.
Business has to step up and play a bigger role, and we want our students to be part of that.
It's fantastic that Oxford are doing this with its MBA students.
So there you have it. That series has been running now for several weeks and actually will culminate with an episode on this event. It's really fun because we follow 2 teams of students all the way through. As you can see, they did field research out to wastewater treatment plants. There's a cinema verite element as many of them have to scatter home in the midst of the pandemic and find ways to continue on with their work and their research. So we encourage you to check it out. It's on all of the Said Business School social channels. The easiest would be to find the Oxford Said Business School channel on YouTube or on our website, oxfordanswers.org, which has a bunch of terrific content. Now, for those who are really interested, we really believe that GOTO represents a fundamentally different way of developing leaders in the 21st century around this notion of systems leadership. And it's something that we've been working for a number of years to share with students and colleagues and partners around the world. And we'll have a slide coming up in a moment, but we run a global program. Go to the next slide, please. A global program called Map the System. And Map the System is really our sort of global go-to. This is run by the School Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And it's a chance for students around the world to go through a very similar process to GOTO, choosing a social and environmental problem that they care about. So they form their own teams, they can work with non-students, and they go through this process of mapping the system and then using that deep analysis to unlock a new understanding of the system and how you can drive solutions. We have over 3,500 teams of students from 53 university partners on 6 continents participating this year. It's now in its 5th year and been growing really wildly. And normally every year, each university sends 1 team here to Oxford for a global final. This year, that'll be in June, and we will be holding it virtually. But this is really a chance for students around the world to participate in a similar process. And we've built a terrific network of systems change educators around the world. If you'd like to learn more about this program, you can go to mapthesystem.sbs.ox.ac.uk to learn more. Next slide, please. I'm seeing our judges coming back here. So before we get to the awards, I just want to take a moment to thank some really important partners who have made this work possible. Peter Tufano already mentioned earlier the Smith School for Enterprise and the Environment, one of our partner institutions here at University of Oxford. And they've been our academic partner all the way through. Cameron Hepburn, the director of the school, gave a terrific kickoff to GOTO earlier in the year, and they've been providing us with a ton of support all the way along the way. We'd also like to recognize our longtime deep strategic partner here at the school, and that is the Skoll Foundation. Partners not only in the Skoll Center, but a lot of work regarding social innovation and systems change. And we couldn't do much of what we're doing without the Skoll Foundation, and we want to recognize them here today. We have a number of other partners, technical partners to thank as well. What we did this year was to try to get a whole bunch of different kinds of organizations that are working on climate action in their own ways to come in at the beginning of the GOTO process to meet with students, to share their ideas, to share their expertise, to share some of their challenges and ideas for projects. We wanted to make sure that students were taking on projects and challenges that were really tangible, real-world problems, and that they'd have organizations that they could work with to make sure that the learning journey can then actually translate into solutions that someone can go forward and implement. And so some of the partners most of them are listed here. As you can see, there are businesses, there are government institutions, our friends at at the B Lab, social enterprises, a whole range of organizations represented here, and many of them have representatives watching and listening with us today. So we want to thank all of you for being a part of this process. We want to make sure that if they haven't already, that the students you've been working with are reporting back to you, because what's most important, of course, is not what happens today, but what happens after this, and that we drive forward some tangible progress. Do we have all of our judges back, Aoife? In process. Next slide, please, Fraser. We'll get to the awards in just a minute. And one shameless plug before we go to the awards. You heard briefly from our board chair, Paul Pullman, earlier on in the session, introducing Al Gore. I had the chance to have a terrific conversation with Paul about the role of business in fighting the climate crisis for the school's new podcast called Reimagine. And him, along with Cameron Hepburn, actually, we just released this episode yesterday, and trying to put the current moment in the COVID pandemic in context as we look ahead to what it means for climate action. And so if you want to hear more from Paul, please do check out the podcast at reimaginepodcast.com or on Oxford Answers. I promise you'll love it. And I hope that we are ready now. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll just walk you through what the awards are going to look like. So we've got audience awards and we've got the judges award. We will announce the audience award first and in just a moment, and that's worth £1,800 for that team. And then every team that's made it this far is going to come away with a prize, and extremely well deserving. As I mentioned, we had 56 teams in this program amongst the MBA class. So for all of them that have reached this stage, it's a really extraordinary accomplishment. The fourth place prize will be worth £600. The third place prize worth £1,200. The second prize, or the runner-up, will be £3,000. And the winner will take home not only £6,000, but they will also be able to virtually lift this magnificent GOTO trophy, which was made with sustainable materials. And MBAs love competitions and love trophies. We couldn't move on without it. So so that's bragging rights come with this as well. So with that, let's turn it back over to our judges to announce the winners. And to kick it off, I believe our lead judge, Nigel, will share a few thoughts and then announce the audience award winner.
Great, thank you, Peter. And first of all, it's a real honour to be a judge here, to be the lead judge. And so I want to thank all the partners and the school for inviting me and the fellow judges. And first of all, I want to congratulate all the teams, not just the 4 we've seen today, but all 56. The judges were very impressed with the quality of what we've seen. So we know that there's another 52 projects that are also very high quality that we haven't seen. So thank you to everybody and congratulations. I think this is it's also great to see this kind of collaborative, systemic analysis and creative solution building at the heart of an MBA program. I know when I met Peter Tefano a couple of weeks ago for the first time, I was saying to him, I've been kind of complaining for a while that MBA schools aren't really teaching systems thinking and how to think about the future better. And then I discovered that you are. So I really think this is leading practice. So well done. I also just wanted to mention that my role as the high-level climate action champion for COP26, I'm talking to with Peter and Charmian and the school about how we might partner, and really hoping that the insights from the GOTO program can help inform the global climate action agenda that I'm responsible for as part of the UNFCCC system, and really hoping that this is just the first step along that partnership. Particularly pleased, as I say, to see students being taught how to think better about the future. I see some of you sneaked in some scenario analysis in the presentation. How to think systemically, and how to think about systems breakthrough, not just incremental change. And we see that all those skills are really, really needed to solve the problems using the power of business going forward. So it's my pleasure to announce the winner of the audience vote. And I guess there's a little drum roll and a sort of pause for effect to keep everyone in suspense. And then it's my pleasure to announce that the winner of the audience prize is EcoBytes. Well done, EcoBytes. Thank you, Peter. Hand back to you now.
Terrific. Congratulations, EcoBytes, and thank you to everyone who voted out there. Well done. Off to a good start. We are going to move on to the fourth place Judges Award, and that is coming, I believe, from Kaya.
Yes, thank you so much. Congratulations to all of the teams. For £600 prize, the fourth place winner is Searching for Shangri-La. Congratulations, you all. Great presentation.
There they are. Well done, team, and thank you. Arunma, the third place prize, please.
Thank you. First, I have to commend all the teams that made submissions for the year's GOTO Summit, and really thank the brilliant finalists. It's now my honor to announce the team that has the third place, EcoBytes. Join me in applauding and acknowledging them.
Bravo, team. You're the only one to walk away with 2 awards today. Well done. And Aoife has the great honor of announcing our winner and runner-up.
Thank you, Peter. So this is the moment I know a lot of anxious MBAs have been waiting for. I am very happy to announce that the winner of the 2020 GOTO Climate Action Summit is HEMP, the Heroes of Environmental Management Progress. Congratulations, Team HEMP. And our runner-up, let's give them a very big round of applause as well, because as Nigel said, this was so close with the judging. Our runner-up is Bessalal Gambia. So congratulations, Team Bessalal Gambia. And now, Peter, we're going to invite the team captain from our winning team to say a few words. Freya, if you'd like to join us. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, judges, and everyone who has been involved in this. I've got to do a massive shout out to my team. It's just been the absolute dream team. That's Can, Peyton, Sahar, Alex, and Yulia. You guys, I think, have demonstrated the type of collaborative behaviour that we need from governments and corporations all around the world to actually achieve this type of change. And this is for the women who make our clothes and for the people who never get a seat at the table.
Oh, thank you so much, Freya. Thank you. That gives me chills. And I just want to say thank you to all of the students who have worked so incredibly hard this year. I know that Peter can say the same, that we're both very proud. We'd like to really thank our judges as well for being here with us today. Your insights have been so helpful in thinking about taking our student projects forward, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. And I'd also just like to reiterate thanks that I know Peter has mentioned while we were away in the judging room. But this has been an incredible team effort this year. The GOTO Climate Action at Oxford Said has involved a huge number of people from a huge number of places around the university as well, including my second home, the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment. And we don't want it to stop here. We want to continue supporting our students to take what they've all learned and the systems thinking, this deep understanding of systemic problems forward. We want them to translate some of their projects into action, and we're really looking forward to working with Nigel's team and to be able to do that in support of the COP26 process. And working with our many partners that you saw on Peter's slides earlier on. It is a very different world to when we started back in January and when we were all together, and we had such a rousing start to GOTO this year. But let's really take this moment as an opportunity to rethink, to reshape, and to really to build a better world. And I think we had a great rousing call to action from our keynote speaker, Mr. Gore, and let's really take that to heart as we're entering into this new phase and this new opportunity.
Thank you, Aoife, and I echo and amplify all of that. Congratulations to the students, thanks to the judges, thank you to the literally dozens of faculty who have been a part of this GOTO journey, and to our many partners, to Fraser and David, our GOTO team members, as well as AV and IT, who must have set some sort of record for a number of Zoom speakers in one event today for pulling this off seamlessly. And I just have one more thing to add before turning it over to our dean to give the final word, and that is about our theme for GOTO next year. The last couple of years, what we've tried to do is focus in on one sustainable development goal each year and have a theme. And so we covered the future of energy last year and climate action this year. We're in a different moment right now, and the world has changed a lot just in the last couple of weeks. And so for next year, we're going to take a slightly different approach. And so our theme for next year's GOTO cohort is going to be building back better, and the recovery from, we hope the recovery from this pandemic. And we'll be looking at how this is affecting all of our critical systems like climate, like jobs and small business and economic systems, et cetera, but really putting that through the lens of what fragilities has the pandemic exposed, and how can we use this opportunity to build back in a stronger, safer, more resilient, and more equitable way. We're really excited about developing that and building it with many of you, and we are also in the process of building a public version of that GOTO that we may run as early as this summer, because we really all need to come together to respond not just to the crisis we have right in this moment, but to be thinking about what's coming ahead in the months and years to come. So please stay tuned and do join us. Thank you very much, and I will turn it over to Dean Tufano.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Aoife. Thanks, everybody. So Peter and Aoife have thanked many. I want to repeat some of those and then add a couple more. So first of all, thank you to Paul Pullman and Al Gore, two amazing leaders who shared their time with us today. And in Paul's case, as chair of our board, a lot of time with us. Thanks to the judges, Nigel, Arumna, and Kaya. Thanks to the students. You know, you made us so proud today. I know that this whole lockdown is tough and it's not the MBA program you wanted, but you did a great job. Thanks to the team that put this together. It's not just Peter and Aoife, it's a whole set of tutors. Thanks to the team behind the scenes, the IT team. Thanks especially to Peter and Aoife. Putting a program like this together is hard work. Putting it together today, when we're in lockdown, when we're all over the world, is just amazing. So you've done a remarkable job, and my hat's off to you. And thank you to all of you. Some of you are students and alums, but some of you have joined us for the first time. So thanks for coming and listening to this. So one of the questions to the judges is, what gives you hope? What gives me hope is all these young people. Al Gore was 28 years old when he went into the House of Representatives. Our MBA students are, different ages, but about that age. And look at what impact he's had over the course of his career. And our young people will too. For those of you who thought, well, I know what MBA programs are like. They all look for quick answers, and they're just all trying to be CEOs, and they're greedy. That's not what you've shown us today. You've shown us that you can dig deep, you can look at systems, you can try to find specific places to start, unlikely places, that you're willing to slow down, that you're willing to find profitable solutions to people and planet. You inspire me. Thank you all, and thanks. Have a great day.